Welcome everybody to the second leg of Center for Sustainable Infrastructure's virtual whistle-stop tour for sustainable infrastructure. Please find your seat on the train. There's plenty of room. Climb on board. Let's give everybody a few minutes to find their seats. Hop on, maybe down at this end of the car. There's seats. We're getting ready. We're getting settled in. Excellent. Welcome, welcome. Everybody got their seat? Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Reese Roth, Executive Director of the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on the second leg of CSI's virtual whistle-stop tour for sustainable infrastructure innovation in the Pacific Northwest. Now, it's no secret that times are tough right now for so many of our communities. With all the economic disruption and the challenges that we're facing together, but this tour is about the future and how we can pivot from tough times to a thriving future for all our communities by reimagining our infrastructure investments. So this whistle-stop tour will visit communities big, small, and in between in all parts of the Pacific Northwest, rural, suburban, and urban alike, communities that are jumping out of the rut of old solutions to innovate. And we'll dig into the big ideas and strategies to solve critical infrastructure challenges that we're wrestling with, and to revitalize local economies, and to rethink how we invest the billions and billions of dollars that we spend every year to operate, maintain, rebuild, expand the infrastructure systems that all of us rely on every day: the water systems, the energy systems, the waste management systems, the transportation systems. Every community needs quality infrastructure. So at each of the stops on our tour, we'll highlight how one innovative community is translating one of these big ideas to their local context. Our first stop was in Raymond, which is a struggling but resilient timber and seafood town in Southwest Washington, small town, but it refuses to stagnate and decline. And instead, they're coming together around an innovative industrial symbiosis strategy to revitalize the community. Now, on this second leg of our tour, we're headed to Olympia, Washington, hometown of the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure. And the big idea we're going to explore today, we've titled Cashing In on the Integration Dividend: Smarter Infrastructure Spending to Build Thriving Communities. So with that, all aboard! Now, we are in Olympia, and Olympia faced a very conventional problem: worsening traffic congestion at an important intersection that was causing problems all along a corridor that's really important for a lot of different users. And that conventional problem had a conventional solution that was both expensive and narrow in that it attempted to solve for only one problem. Instead, the city decided to use a strategy called value planning to develop a more holistic solution set that can benefit all the various users of the corridor and generate lots of different kinds of economic, social, and environmental value for the community. In other words, Olympia looked to value planning to realize the integration dividend. So we're going to start off with a hometown tour of this Olympia project, and it's my honor to introduce Jim Ryu, who's an engineer, and I'm obviously a big fan of engineers.
Hello, welcome to Olympia. My name is Jim Ryu, and I'm a project manager with the city's Public Works Department. I'd like to take a few minutes of your time to share our experiences using a value planning process for the design of a major road construction project. This is Phones Road, and it's an incredibly important corridor for the city of Olympia. Unfortunately, it's in terrible condition. The pavement is literally falling apart, and the bicycle and pedestrian facilities are totally inadequate. But those aren't the challenges that bring us to value planning. The real challenges are the number of competing uses that need to be served within a very short distance. Phones Road is only a little over a half a mile long, and it begins at the north end at a busy intersection that's surrounded by retail services, restaurants, a gas station, and shopping centers. Moving south just a few hundred feet, we come to the crossing with the Olympia Woodland Trail. This is a very popular bike trail used by pedestrians and bicyclists for commuting as well as recreational purposes. So where I'm standing, immediately adjacent to the trail, we have two major manufacturers. These are 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operations, and there are large trucks moving into and out of these facilities all day and all night. Moving south along Phones Road, we enter another commercial and light industrial section. This section of the road generates lots of traffic. The southernmost section of the road transitions to entirely residential, single-family homes and large apartment complexes. So the challenge for the city is serving all of these competing needs and building bicycle and pedestrian facilities that are not only safe, but inviting. For that, we turn to value planning.
Jim, now you have a PowerPoint or some brief comments here?
Yes, I do. Let me steal your screen.
Okay.
Okay, and there we are. So I hope that little video gave you a little bit of a taste of what it's like to be out on Phones Road. And what I'd like to do now is just take a few more minutes to provide some context around the project as a way of sort of setting the stage for the upcoming panel discussions. So I started working on this project in 2010. The project had actually been around for quite a while, and at that time, we'd established the basic footprint of the project, and we had a pretty solid cost estimate. And what that showed us is, like Reese said, is this was going to be a pretty expensive project, a little bit more expensive than we were really used to taking on within typical transportation projects in the city. It was going to require a significant amount of right-of-way acquisition, and there was going to be a whole lot of concrete and asphalt. So around 2011, or towards the end of 2011, the project was put on a shelf, primarily based on the cost. But it wasn't one we could walk away with, so it was recently picked up again. And when it was picked up again, it kind of got re-examined, and there really grew this sense that this really wasn't the kind of project that we wanted to be delivering for our community. It wasn't really consistent with how we understood our community's values. So with that realization, the city decided to take a step back and see if there was a different way that we could approach the design process that would give us the result that we were looking for. So Rich Hoy, the Public Works Director, who you're going to hear from shortly, reached out to the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure, and Reese offered the value planning process as a way to approach the project in a different way and re-envision the project. You're going to be hearing more about the details of the value planning process. So I'm not going to get too much into that now, but I do want to emphasize that probably the most important aspect of value planning is bringing together a very broad spectrum of expertise and perspectives. We've been using the term integration dividend, and to me, the integration dividend is the added value that we achieve by bringing these diverse perspectives into the project planning and design processes so that we deliver a project to the community that focuses on the community's values. So what's the result? Well, we don't really know yet. This is a photograph of what it looks like out there today. that's not too far from where I was standing. We've got about another year of design, right-of-way acquisition, and permitting, and then we hope to start the project in early 2022. This will be a 2-year effort, so hopefully in 2024, if invited back, we'll be looking at something more like this. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Reese. I want to thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the whistle stop.
Thank you so much, Jim, for that terrific hometown tour of the Phones Road Value Planning Project in Olympia. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, at each station on this virtual whistle stop tour, we'll highlight how one innovative community is translating one of the big ideas to their local context. And we'll dig into the big ideas and strategies that are key for the Pacific Northwest to solve critical infrastructure challenges, revitalize local economies, and rethink how we invest billions and billions of dollars that we spend every year on infrastructure systems to realize the integration dividend and maximize the value for our communities. So now I want to hand it off to Ted Sturdivant, my colleague, CSI's Director of Strategic Initiatives, for a panel discussion with some terrific experts to dive into this big idea of the integration dividend. So over to you, Ted.
All right. Thanks, Reese. Good afternoon now, everybody. I'm Ted Sturdivant, the Director of Strategic Initiatives here at CSI. And what we want to do now in this next piece is take advantage of some great experience and wisdom from our panelists and both explore the Phones Road project in Olympia enough so that people understand basically what happened there and what we're talking about, and also then have a discussion about what are the principles embedded in that process and how might they apply at a broader scale as we look to sort of accelerate positive changes into the future. As we do that, I just want to invite folks to think about what are those principles that emerge. And spoiler alert, as you've already heard from Jim, it has something to do with more integrated approaches, more systems oriented approaches, that designing projects that offer higher and broader value to the community. And just think about how far do these principles apply, whether it's on infrastructure projects more generally, whether it's beyond infrastructure and into policy and maybe other fields as well. That's a question that we're thinking a lot about, is just how sort of broadly applicable is this integration dividend that we're going to talk about. So with that, I have the honor to introduce our really great panelists here who can talk about really great local innovation work that they've been up to. And I want to tell people also, if you have a question, feel free to enter it in the Q&A tab down below, and we will get to as many of those as we can. So with that, I want to introduce first Fran Eide. Fran is the city engineer for Olympia. She's got over 35 years in municipal engineering, and she's a member of the Committee on Sustainability for the American Society of Civil Engineers. And at the Society, she also helped develop the Envision Sustainable Infrastructure Rating System, which is a comprehensive framework that looks at over 60 criteria across environmental, economic, and social impacts to help rate infrastructure's sustainability. And she and her team in Olympia use this and other tools to guide infrastructure development at Olympia. And Fran is a graduate of St. Martin's College. Welcome, Fran. It's an honor to have you. Next, I want to introduce Jemay Hoffman, who is Sound Transit's light rail development manager for Eastlink, which is a 14-mile extension for the light rail system. Jemay, like our other panelists, cares deeply about our planet, people, and prosperity. And Jemay has over 20 years of experience in transportation and making more sustainable cities. And her sort of record of that work includes director at the Livable Cities at Livable Cities for VIA Architecture and Planning. She was the lead for sustainable transportation at the city of Seattle. Jemay also was the executive director of Transportation Choices Coalition, a statewide transportation advocacy organization. Jemay has been very active with Seattle civic issues as a volunteer in the community and on numerous campaigns, and is a graduate of Cornell University. And last but not least, I want to introduce Rich Hoy, who is the Public Works Director, as you've heard. Rich oversees the city's transportation and system and utilities, as well as the city's fleet and facilities. Rich has been at the city since 2005. He joined as the Director of Water Resources, where he oversaw the city's drinking water, wastewater, and storm and surface water utilities. And Rich, I know this from personal experience, was instrumental in developing a number of really breakthrough regional water supply agreements with the Nisqually Indian tribe and neighboring cities that is going to have a real positive impact on sort of the water picture in this region for many years to come. In 2012, Rich was awarded the National Professional Manager of the Year Award for Water Resources by the American Public Works Association. And prior to joining the city, Rich was at the Washington State Department of Health, Office of Drinking Water, where he served as both deputy director and acting director. Rich was a Peace Corps volunteer back in the 90s in the Slovak Republic, and has a civil engineering degree from the Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Welcome all of you, and thanks for joining us. So, Rich, let's start with you. So Jim gave us a little bit of background on the project, and there's some history to it. But essentially, why did you decide to go a different path? What about the project made you think, let's go with this value planning approach instead? And then, give us a quick story on what happened from there.
Well, sure, I'm happy to. And I just want to say thanks for having me as part of this panel and get to celebrate the great work we've done together between the city and the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure. Jim did a great job with kind of a high-level summary of the process. And so I'll just share from my perspective, this is a very significant project for the city. It's a very unique corridor in Olympia. Has some of our only industry, as Jim mentioned, a regional trail that crosses it. We have a mix of housing on the southern end, big box retail, the state motor pools on this corridor. And so we're trying to juggle a lot of different uses. And this has been a project that was on the books at the city for a long time. And I had reservations about it. I think anytime we're engaging in a road widening project, I think we have to look at it with some question and some skepticism about why we're doing it. And in this particular case, we were going about looking at this project primarily from a traditional transportation traffic management perspective of level of service, volume to capacity ratio. We had a problem, we need to widen to address it. So we were going to be widening this roadway throughout its whole length. And, at the same time, the city has done a good job even with that of layering on other needs, adding bicycle facilities, adding sidewalks, addressing utilities at the same time. But even with that, there was not really a holistic approach that we were taking with regard to the project. As Jim mentioned, it was at a very high cost. We were concerned about its affordability. And, really, the more I looked at it, the less comfortable I felt that it was consistent with our comprehensive plan vision for our city of, a community that's walkable, bikeable, transit-oriented, high livability, economically vibrant, supportive of housing. I didn't think that, the answer that we had crafted to that point with this project was the one that was going to help us achieve our vision. So we took a step back, and I was familiar with the good work of the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure and reached out and asked for help in taking a fresh look at this project. Let's kind of start over and look at the project from the social, economic, and environmental perspectives and with the values of our community and our vision, and answer the question, are we building the right project here? And given the importance of this project and the uniqueness of this corridor. And so, as Fran, you'll hear from her later, she often says it's important to go slow to go fast. And so we needed to step back and make sure that we were building the right project. And so a unique aspect of this was that rather than just, primarily this being driven by the transportation staff, we brought in addition to those staff, we brought in economic development director, we brought in staff to work on housing, on environmental services, on both city and regional planning perspectives. We brought in the Parks and Recreation folks at the city, given the trail, to really just sit down and look at the different aspects of this project and answer that question, were we building the right project for the city? And we've made a lot of changes as a result of that. I think we're going to build a much better project that's more in line with our values, and it's going to be at a lower cost. So I really feel like we got a lot of value out of this process with CSI.
And Rich, maybe say a little bit more about what distinguishes your experience here with value planning from just doing stakeholder engagement. Could we sum that up by saying, well, make sure you bring stakeholders in, or was there something different about value planning from normal sort of stakeholder engagement in terms of actually allowing people to be part of the creative process?
Yeah, I think often, with our projects we're rolling out with stakeholder engagement after a lot of the analysis has been done, the planning for the project is done, you're kind of rolling out more with project concepts to get feedback on, or, results of pre-design. This was stepping back even further before we got into that stage to take a fresh look at this project. And one of the first things that we did was we got all of the folks that I mentioned, looking at this from, again, social, environmental, economic perspectives. One of the first things that we did was we went out in the field and walked the site. We walked the entire length of the corridor and then came back together to share perspectives. And we were seeing different things depending upon our work experience, our lived experience, and I think it was fascinating to sort of hear the different needs that folks were coming up with and the opportunities that we were seeing, and we were sharing that collectively together. And I remember the day in which we all went out there. There were 30-some people out on the site. It was pouring down rain, and I remember it was a very impactful experience for me to see a mom pushing a stroller on a shoulder with no sidewalk, with huge puddles, pouring down rain, trying to get from the southern end of the corridor where the housing was, including a lot of affordable housing, up to the northern end where the retail and services are. And it's like, it just cemented for me, we needed to do something to improve the conditions for folks walking and biking through that corridor, that it was a pretty terrible condition that folks have been dealing with for a long time there. And so going out and seeing the site together and then coming back and then having a creative process, we were all at the table together looking at different parts of this corridor and seeing the opportunities and the needs of the community through interdisciplinary teams was, I think, really impactful for us, reshaping what this project was going to be for the city moving forward.
So Jemay and Fran, feel free to contribute to this too. You both were part of the process. What would you add in terms of what sort of value or benefit you saw in using this process?
Yeah, I'd be happy to supplement some of what Rich was just describing, is that I think having all those different stakeholders come together, and then we all really established, like, what are our key goals, what were the key outcomes we wanted. going out and doing that site visit, and we were in these different teams. And then I think one of the things that made it more tangible was coming back, and we actually started sketching, what the area of Phones Road and the surrounding area could accomplish. And so then, and tying that back to the goals that we originally started with. And I think the outcome is that instead of a bunch of ideas that then needed to be formulated into design, you actually had something physical, a physical representation of the ideas and then how they could all fit together that helped take it to that next level of implementation. And I think the other piece of this too is when you think of traditional stakeholder engagement, it is sort of a bunch of people providing input on one design, and this felt much more like it was a team of people coming up with the design, right? And really being collaborative and bouncing ideas back and forth. And I think as a result, because we had those different types of stakeholders, it also opens the door to different funding opportunities, right? So there might be economic development funding. There might be, of course, funding for additional ped, bike, or trail improvements. There might be access to jobs funding. So it helped us by being grounded in those goals and then thinking about possibilities to expand our horizons about what was possible.
So, and maybe this is a question for Rich and Fran. Given this experience, what thoughts do you have about sort of whether and how broadly you might apply this approach in Olympia moving forward?
Do you want to jump in on that, Fran, and then I can add to it?
Sure. If I start to get a little garbled, I'll have to go black on the video. I have a little unstable internet here today. This process really made a huge impact on how we do our projects at the City of Olympia. As has been described, it's such an eclectic corridor and just a broad variety of users. And in the past, we would get a project, right? And it went from point A to point B. And a lot of work was already on paper in front of us, and our engineering team would pick it up and run with it. And then along the line, somewhere we would reach out to utilities or somebody else that may be affected by the project. So eventually you got there as far as connecting with everybody, but that meant that you were a portion of the way down the line with your design, and more than likely you would have to backtrack in order to incorporate something into the design that was important, say on a transportation project. Maybe there was an element of utilities that really needed to be addressed. And so as a result of this and going out in the field, where we went out to go see and ask why, all in the context of the goal that was stated by the city for this project, what we wanted to accomplish, we have institutionalized that into our process. And we now have a project called Building Capital Projects Together, where just by the very nature, you can guess that it's a very collaborative process. But step one, after the project has been identified as ready to go, we assign a project team. And that team will go out into the field. The project owner will start the meeting by sharing some background about the project, what they're trying to accomplish, what the goal of that project is. And then this diverse team, if it's a transportation project, it definitely includes utilities, and if there's others that may be affected, even outside of our organization. We will invite them to this field visit, and we have a script, if you will, so that we have a standard framework based on environmental, economic, and social elements that we look at the project through. So the lens is markedly different than where we were to start with. And then, as Jamae mentioned on the Phones Road exercise, we always come back to City Hall or back to a meeting space. Now it's Zoom. And debrief. What did you see and why it was important? And then we talk about whether or not we can still meet the goal of the project, or are we still aiming at the right target? And reconfirm that again with everybody around the table, including the project owner. So we have all the stakeholders there at the outset. It may seem like a big effort. Others that I've talked to, like, oh my gosh, there's all those people. How much does that cost? Oh boy, it's how much you get, how much you're investing. Because as I described before, you know, you can take a couple, 3 people out there, but you still have to talk to the others. And when we were doing it piecemeal along the line, it just ended up taking longer and costing more. So the concept of value added under the guise of Envision, a rating tool that has this sort of framework, is definitely a part of how we do our projects. And it can be scaled up to huge projects or down to small projects. The value is the synergy of this eclectic group of people, what they're bringing, and how we're defining that project so that we get it right at the outset. It makes for great conversation and great projects.
You spoke to something I'd like to follow up on. At CSI, we talk about helping communities do what we call navigate the conventional thicket, which means, you know, these projects that aren't conventional, sort of single problem, single solution approaches that people are used to approving, are used to funding. This process is more complex. It sounds like, you know, it gets you to more and broader values for the community. It can find efficiencies through synergies, but it's harder. You know, it's big. It's more complex. There's more to it. You spoke to some of that. You know, and obviously, whatever really cool designs you guys dream up, you then have to get them supported and funded and built in the world that is still used to supporting and funding and building conventional projects. So really, this is a question for any or all of you, just to speak to that, your sense of, is it worth it? You know, is it worth it to do this more complex, less accepted approach, you know, when there is such a strong pull toward the conventional? So I'll just throw that open for you, Fran, or any others.
Well, I have a few thoughts I can jump in. You know, if we just take the example for the city with the Phones Road project, you know, we are going to be constructing, you know, as a result of going through this work, you know, we saw opportunities to, you know, for instance, reevaluate the existing traffic configuration and the existing lanes and pavement to make it work better for the congestion issues that we were experiencing without the need for widening of the project. And so as a result of that, we're going to save, we figure, probably $4 to $5 million, you know, just by taking a fresh look. So the investment up front in taking another look at it is saving us money in the long run. We also, you know, I think as a result of having our economic development director as part of the process, I think we saw a greater appreciation for the work that we needed to do to support the industries that are located along the corridor and the retail activity. So we brought a lot more thinking to how trucks would be navigating this corridor, how they, and, you know, the interaction that they would be having with the trail crossing, because the two industries are right there. And I think we did a lot of really good work on that, that then helped inform decisions that these two industries have been making to reinvest and expand their operations. I think they, they had decisions to make about whether or not it was going to continue to be viable to exist along this corridor, and they made the decision, yes, to do that. And I think the fact that the city was investing in the corridor and thinking seriously about their needs among all the different users of the corridor, I think really paid off for us economically as well. Sometimes there could be some hesitation about the investment of this time up front and to bring the different perspectives to the table. But I know in our experience, it's paid off in terms of a lower cost project and folks choosing to invest in this corridor. I think it benefits us when we're out trying to build the funding for the project to be able to show this work that we've done, that we're building the right project, that we've thought about things ahead of time, that we're not going to be running into problems later with project delays or rescoping that's costly down the line, that we've done our homework and we're building the right project for our community. I think it goes over much better with funders.
And if I could just add to that as well, it translates also pays huge dividends in building relationships. When you, again, before our old process was, it happened within this sort of silo, and eventually it came out and others were talked to. But when you bring everybody to the table and they have the opportunity to ask a question or share their perspective, we've seen it pay huge dividends in the relationships that we have with not only within our organization, but as Rich and Jim have talked to, the relationships with the businesses along this corridor, by reaching out to them and able to engage them and share with them what we're doing and how we're doing it. It has paid huge dividends, and taking and scaling it over again to our standard process. Again, I can't speak to the relationships enough, and also the efficiency, which of course translates into cost. But for example, we had a rather complex water project, and we had our field visit, and it included a consulting team, and we had one iteration of that consultant contract. Kind of unheard of, and getting the scope right on a project. And we are under construction on that project right now. The efficiencies that you gain by incorporating or taking on this value perspective on a project is just, can't emphasize the value of it enough. It just really pays dividends at so many different places. It's not simply about the efficiencies translating to money, but our investment in people, in our community, and how we do our work.
And I just want to add, one of the things that's bringing up for me is you talked about how the project actually moved along faster to implementation. So often our projects, there's a big gap between design and actually building the project. And often what happens, I know I saw it a lot at the City of Seattle, is there's a new group of stakeholders who have either just moved into the area or have just taken over the businesses in the area, and they weren't part of that original design, right? And so I think part of what can happen with this value planning effort is building those relationships, and then also memorializing how this project is trying to meet all those different goals helps you as you move forward and how you're presenting the project so that people can see themselves in the project and you don't get as much reaction as you go through that process to get it funded and implemented.
So as much as it's a great story that Phones, the future of the Phones Road corridor is going to be a sort of better and smarter one than previously. Most folks on this call and around the world won't get to bike through that like I do. So, and hearkening back to something Reese said at the outset, we're spending lots of money on infrastructure, every day, sort of building and maintaining and extending infrastructure. And a real aha moment for me this last year was when I realized, we think a lot about sort of what does the future look like? What does the future look like in 2050, in the middle of this century? Given that our infrastructure is built to last for decades, we are literally building that future today. And so the nature of that infrastructure, which can either enable all sorts of wonderful things or it can constrain us. It can keep us from doing wonderful things depending on sort of what we build and how long it lasts. So this question of scaling, of, you know, how do we take advantage of this at scale? Olympia obviously is already taking steps to do so in terms of its processes and future projects. But I want to just ask for what thoughts you all might have on what capacities are needed, or what myths need to be busted in order for this to become business as usual instead of the exception to the rule. Jimé, I have to imagine that extending a light rail line must get amazingly complex awfully fast. So let me just open it up here around this question of what enabled this to work, and what thoughts do you have on establishing the kind of capacities, whether it's inside of local governments, whether it's some capacity that is more available to local governments to support this kind of work. What thoughts do you have on what local communities need in order to evolve into this way of doing things?
Well, one of the things I can talk to on light rail extensions is that as Sound Transit does its work now, like first I'll just give you the context of one of the ways that I think we've changed from doing business as usual to thinking more about societal and community outcomes and really what's going to happen with the project is our approach to affordable housing and transit-oriented development around the light rail stations. Sound Transit was definitely started with like, we only have this much money and we're trying to build this much, like engineering mindset. And partially to answer your question, it was a combination of both the growing market interest in transit-oriented development, the dire need for affordable housing, policy changes at the state and regional level, as well as just getting it, that when you have people living around a station, that means more riders, right? There's been this whole different approach in that instead of, for example, just buying the property that we need for construction along the alignment, now we first take a step back and we're doing a much closer look at where could the alignment connect to really take advantage of opportunities to have livable, walkable communities around the alignment. And then also as we buy land, is there a way that we can buy the land that we need for construction in such a way that when we're done with it, it could be used for transit-oriented development and affordable housing? We still, just to be clear, we still have to only buy land that we need for a transportation purpose. We can't go be speculative, but we can think smartly about both where the alignment goes and using additional property for that. So one example of that is on the East Link extension that I'm working on that goes from downtown Seattle out to Bellevue and connecting out to Microsoft is with the city of Bellevue, we actually just this week transferred some property that we just finished using for construction, and they're going to be building transit-oriented development with affordable housing, as well as our transit access facilities, right? So some of the bike parking and auto parking and ADA access that we need to the station. And so really that partnership and leveraging the additional funds that in that case, the city of Bellevue could get from the affordable housing community to make that project happen is one example of just thinking broader, right? About what's the societal outcome that we need to have. One of the things though, when you just asked about what do local communities need, there's such a difference sometimes as Sound Transit does go out and try to apply this new approach between different communities. Some communities just say, we want a big parking garage and that's what we want, right? And that's what they know. And others are more, they've got enough resources and capacity in their planning staff that they do want to engage in thinking about opportunities for livable, walkable communities around their stations. And so one of the things I think about at the regional and state level is what could we do to have some sort of, maybe it's resource training program where we can get staff that will go and help some of the jurisdictions that have less resources to do that, or could Sound Transit actually provide some of those resources and help engage the decision makers, so that it's not just a matter of who's got the resources and capacity, but it's also that there's some technical assistance available to help people think about how we can create great communities. I'll stop there. I have more examples.
Well, I'll maybe just piggyback on that a little bit, to say that, we have to, moving forward, we have to think differently about our investments in infrastructure. We can't afford to continue to invest in infrastructure the way that we did in decades past. The funding structures aren't there to support it. We just can't afford it. And it's also leading to outcomes that I don't think any of us feel good about in terms of, impacts on the climate, or impacts on, social justice issues, depending upon how we've constructed infrastructure. So we have to think differently. We have to shake it up. And, so our traditional approaches of going about things in a more siloed way are built upon those old models, or they come out of that. And this forces going through a value planning exercise and bringing the different perspectives from and values of the community to the table, forces you to have the conversations. And in the end, I think it's going to result in a better project for your community. And in our experience, a less costly one, which is critical for us because we're really stretched on what we can afford. And hopefully a project that works better for more people. And there can be help in terms of the state government and folks that fund projects. It tends to be siloed at that level, and restrictions on what you can spend money on can sometimes drive things more than is really helpful. So I think we have to be looking not just at the local level on how we do this, but how we structure programs that fund infrastructure at the state level to open up more possibilities. So those are just a few thoughts.
Great, thank you. And just tagging off of that, Fran, given your work at the national level, are there trends, opportunities that you're seeing that you're excited about as we look to scale up these kind of smarter approaches to our infrastructure investments?
Yeah, ASCE is really working hard to bring the message that sustainable infrastructure right out of the box doesn't cost more. And I think that's one of the big things to overcome, and it has been a message from others here. It's about doing the right project and then doing it right. And so at ASCE, the Committee on Sustainability has created a sustainability roadmap, and it's work that the overall committee, as well as some of our subcommittees, are working on, including a sustainability standard. And it's about bringing it to the locals. I sit on this national committee, and at first was a little bit overwhelming. Here I am from this, Olympia is the state capital, but it's not a large city by any stretch, right? And so going and sitting on these committees, it's like, what do I bring? Well, I bring the local perspective, that grassroots perspective and experience for how these projects can be done. My entire experience is with smaller organizations, smaller municipalities, and Olympia just shows that it can be done right. Our leaders, our community demands of us that we do the right project, that we think about it. We don't just cookie cutter it. We consider the economic, the environmental, and the social aspects of it, and it is reproducible. The process that we do now, the Building Capital Projects Together process, is is not complex. It is something we have up on a wall, and it's taken a while to go from where we were before to this new process, but it's really been embraced because so many people can see it and feel engaged and a part of it. And when people feel like they're a part of the process and a part of the project, it becomes their success too. So it just brings everybody to a different place of engagement in the project. And so taking it back up to ASCE, it's really using the organization to get the message out from the national level to the state, to the local chapters. And then that synergy that comes from those conversations and that information being disseminated and then being truthed at Olympia, at other large projects. It just it's not, we can't just do it here because it's small. That's not the case. It applies across the board. And one of the elements of Envision, which is a tool that ASCE is really engaged in, was and as mentioned, a part of developing, is just that it's, oh, now train of thought. Oh no, there goes that train.
Left the station.
It was good. Right, it did. Oh my goodness. But really kind of excited about the whole thing. But the tool just provides an element, including where I was going was leadership. And a project needs to have strong leadership. And it's not just the project manager, it's the entire team that supports the work that's done, is what I wanted to say there. So, yeah. So those that may be part of an organization, certainly ASCE is an organization to reach out to. There are many resources there, and reach out and leverage those resources, regardless of the size of the organization, whether it's public or private, that you work with. We have to be sharing our experiences and talking about them. So that's why this Whistle Stop tour, I think, is hugely important in getting the word out and showing that small towns like Raymond, and then maybe next size up Olympia, and then whoever is next, that it is scalable and everybody has an experience to share. So.
Thanks, Fran. Yeah, that an important belief at CSI is that, you know, everyone both deserves and can have access to the 21st century sustainable economy by bringing the right tools to folks. Hey, in our few remaining minutes, I want to try to hit real quickly a few audience questions. I'm going to answer one, which is, does this value planning work in a virtual format? And we found the answer to that this year. We did a project with the city of Gresham in Oregon, and it was really quite successful. So yes, this can work in the time of COVID. And let me throw out two questions and just ask any of you to hit these quickly. The first is, we've got one of our participants up in the Rainier Valley in Seattle is asking for advice on how can she get sort of transportation planners and decision makers to do really strong early thinking on pedestrian walkways and so forth. So that's one question. A second question specific to the Olympia project is just quickly, how was traffic congestion addressed, given that you didn't just widen? So whoever wants to hit those, please jump in.
Well, I'll speak a little bit. We were able to address the traffic congestion issues by looking creatively at the existing right-of-way configuration. We reconfigured some of the lanes in order to have them work more efficiently. We modified plan for the signal in order to have that work more efficiently. We did some access control changes to allow, it will restrict some turning movements, but it will keep the corridor flowing. We incorporated a compact roundabout into the design that was going to be considerably less expensive, but help us make the access control changes work more effectively. And so those changes, taking a fresh look at it, allowed us to be able to do it within the existing basically footprint of the roadway. And the widening that we're doing is really just for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. If we had widened the project, we would have layered in, as I mentioned before, bike lanes and sidewalks. But I think a folly that a lot of communities have made is that, let's say we're going to widen the roadway out to 5 lanes, and then we say we're going to address that it's going to be bikeable because we're going to add a bike lane. Well, there's relatively few people within the community that feel comfortable riding a bike on a bike lane on a 5-lane roadway with high speeds and volumes. It's just, very few people choose to make that happen. So if we're able to keep roads narrower, keep them flowing, keep them slower, and then look at adding some protection to buffer the bicycle facilities, now we open it up for a lot more people to be able to make that as a viable choice, to not have to get in the car. They can bicycle on that roadway with their children, and it just opens up a lot more possibility to make multimodal transportation work. I don't know that I have the perfect answer to the Rainier Valley situation, other than I think there's no substitute for actually going out and physically walking the corridor. Become a pedestrian, become a bicyclist, and try to navigate it. And then your eyes will be opened up quickly about what needs to be done.
Great.
And this is Janae. I feel like I should jump in on the Rainier Valley situation, as well as so that, the answer of how do we think future forward about what we need for pedestrian and bike access when we can't exactly. So the hard part is the transportation models are so terrible at forecasting future demand for walk, bike, and transit, right? And so as we're talking about with this value planning effort, and I've seen this happen with one of our stations on the Federal Way alignment, really looking at what are the land uses on either side. The project had a big parking garage, but let's put it back behind the station so we can focus on pedestrian, bike, and transit-oriented development and the connection to the college across the street in front. So part of that just gets into people first instead of auto first thinking, right, and design as you do this design. In the Rainier Valley situation, I'm glad that person must be working with Anna, and I'm glad because it is really going to need to be, and I look at that situation, and we could talk about it offline. What's so needed is the way that the freeway off-ramps come in near that station, and what could we do to right size, city size those, working with WashDOT to try to make that a better situation.
Well, we're going to try to let folks get back to their days by 1 o'clock, with apologies for Jam and Reese here. Going to turn it back over to him. Just want to say thank you so much to Rich, Jamae, Fran, and Jim for sharing your thoughts and perspectives with the group here. And just know, folks, without going into details on it, how we can bring this kind of approach to scale across our communities is something that we think about every day, and invite people to sort of join us in that work. So thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Reese to take us out.
Thanks, everybody. Really enjoyed the second leg of the Whistle Stop Tour for Sustainable Infrastructure. Stay tuned. Next station, Gresham, Oregon, leveraging infrastructure projects to build a more equitable and resilient world. Very exciting project, and you're going to really enjoy, I think, that stop. I'll flag one more opportunity next week on Tuesday, December 15th. We have a virtual year-end celebration of CSI's work and a fundraiser. We're a nonprofit organization. Your help in supporting this work absolutely enables us to continue and expand our reach. So help us build this thriving future together. We'll have special guests. We'll have virtual cocktails. It'll be a lot of fun. Please join us. Thank you for your support. Thanks everybody who was able to participate in this event. So there's more information on the Whistle Stop Tour. Stay tuned with that. The event is complete. Thank you.